Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ahmed Ghoneim. I'll be the chairperson and the discussant for the three papers that we have today. Just to start and make it to make use of the time, without further ado, we start according to the program with the first paper on the past and the future trade patterns of the MENA region, the pursuit of growth, by Pınar, Abdullah, and Halit. So you have, let's say we have 50 minutes for each, and then we have 5 minutes for discussion for each paper. Can you please take the mic, because it's only one mic.
You know that?
No.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the joint paper with my two colleagues. I have the last author, Halit Yanıkkaya, from Economics Department at the Gebze Technical University in Turkey. So, what is the motivation? The basic motivation is that, as everybody knows, that the trade is the engine of growth for all countries. And we have seen, especially after the 90s, we have seen very increased integration of the world economies across the countries. So, but at the latest financial crisis at 2008, we have seen a somehow sluggish globalization, or some say semi-globalization or localization types of thing. But after some kind of decreases in trade shares, back to the same level, but it is stagnant since then. And as we have seen, for the MENA countries, almost the trade share is almost 1/3 or more than 1/3 of the GDP, and we have seen many liberalization efforts across the region, across the MENA region, within the region, and with the European Union or other types of the world. But as we have seen from the literature, there is a little effect, or we don't see the expected benefit from more integration from these integration efforts. Basically, there are two literatures. One is directly related, one is indirectly related to our research. The first one is the trade and growth literature, and as we know that this is highly studied literature over all the world, but there is a limited number of studies on the MENA region, especially considering the global value chain, the effect of growth effect of GVCs within the MENA region. And the other type of the literature, considering what are the effects of liberalization on the trade volumes. And we have seen a number of papers on the Hagemeyer and Parr and the others to understand what happens to the trade within the MENA and with the other countries. So basically, we try to answer three questions. The first one, what are the actual trading patterns within the MENA and with the world? And what kind of effect on growth? And basically, what happens if we see more integration within the region or outside the region? So, because of the time limit, I'm not going to discuss the third one. I'm going to speak on the first one and a little bit on the second one. So, what we have seen, basically, we are looking at the global value chain, the backward integration or forward integration. We want to see the, let me go the full screen mode. Here, we choose the MENA region because it has very high heterogeneities within the itself and across the globally. And basically, we have divided to MENA region in 3 distinct groups: North Africa, Gulf countries, and the other Middle East countries. So we have looked at the trade with the MENA region and other EU, United States, China, and the rest of the world, rest of the developing countries and the rest of the developed countries. Basically, we have used the long decomposition of value-added trade. This is the long process. And you've got the value-added component of export or value-added component of in each country's GDPs or each country's sectors. And again, the foreign value-added content of imports. So basically, as you see here, like these are 36% or 35% are gross numbers. What we have actually much less than this. About like these numbers for many countries around 25% in terms of value added over GDP case. So basically, 2-phase strategy. First thing, what are the effect of trade volumes or value chain on the each sectoral growth, and plus what's going to happen in the future. So basically, data come from ERA 26, 186 countries, data, and 26 sectors, 2 agriculture, 1 mining, 10 manufacturing, 12 services, 1 is re-exporting that we have excluded. So all these data sets, we most all of you may have used this, and these are the control variables that you will see on the regression. So these are the specific pattern that you will see with this data from 90 to the latest year, 2015. So the basic thing you see, the EU share and other developed country shares decreasing in terms of value-added export. And on the other side, we have seen the higher export share of developing countries, including China. This is the typical trend. And what you see within the MENA, you wouldn't see much. So most of the integration of MENA with the outside of the MENA countries. This was the intermediate export. This is the final export. Actually, the first one, the GVCs, we call global value chain in terms of forward value chains. This one is the traditional trade. So this is the final goods that exported to the EU and developed countries, again decreasing. Like what we have seen for the last 50, 60 years, there's a trend of the developed countries' shares actually drops during the time. And we have seen the rise of global south within the intermediate export or final export or intermediate import. One difference is here, you have seen the blue, yellow line, there's some increases in GCC and other Middle East in terms of final export destination for many countries. But North Africa has the very minor share within the region. This is the intermediate export. Intermediate import. Again, this is also decreasing. So for all items, or all 3 items, the share of developed countries, including United States, European Union, and other developed countries, we have seen drops. And what we have seen, the rise of global south. mostly other developing countries, and you will see the China is the highest increase in the region. So you will see that almost 1/3 of the trade shares with the European Union countries, and this share, including the developed countries, is about to decrease since the maybe last 15 years. So at the reverse case, share of developing countries in terms of intermediate export and import increasing, and the rest we have seen very high levels of intra-regional trade final export, but we don't see much trade in terms of value chain integration within the MENA countries. So this is the second question that we try to answer. What is the effect of all those forward or backward participation or final export, the effect of those flows on the value-added growth of each sectors? So we have the country by sector and by country data. So we have 186 countries, but only have 19 MENA countries. We just aggregate the data for MENA and 3 subcomponents: European Union, US, China, and the rest. And all those capital intensity, average years of schooling, and time dummies are self-explanatory. So we have using the 5-year moving average of variables with the dynamic panel data method. So as you would see, there's a lag-dependent variable. So this is dynamic and actually estimated by the GMM model. For the second part that I'm going to skip it. For the main result that I'm going to mostly talk about this. So we have the over 400 units of cross-sectional units, and all those statistics, AR and Hansen statistics, are normal as expected, and our instruments are reliable, and we have no problem with the test statistic. So here, the first variable is the lag-dependent variable. As you will see, this is kind of very persistent result. There's a very high persistency. So I'm not going to talk about all these things, but if there's a question, I would answer. I basically focus on the 3 variables. The first one, intermediate export, which is called forward value chain. So as you will see, all these at this equation, this is only for MENA countries. So the left-hand side variable is the MENA countries' sectoral growth. Don't be confused on that. So for the MENA countries, as you will see, by integrating forward with either of these countries, mostly its subcomponent, EU, United States, or other developed countries, the MENA region actually benefits from this. So more integration, forward integration, more export is good for the region. But in terms of the traditional trade, which is final export over value added, this is it's not that beneficial. But as you will see, this is traditional trade, and its share is not that high, and there's also very high heterogeneity across the North African countries, GCC countries, and other Middle East countries. So the last one, intermediate import value added, is actually the backward participation. What is the content of foreign value added in your sectoral output, sectoral value added? So this is, as you will see, if you look at these 4 columns, many countries do not benefit from trading with itself within the region. Can get benefit from the forward integration, but not from the forward integration. These 2 columns, European Union and United States column, as you see, these are the statistically important and economically important too. So if you say the 10% increase in intermediate export to United States, you say like 0.6%. Here, 10% increase from import from the United States, you will see like 1% increase in growth in the MENA countries. This is actually consistent with the technology transfer arguments. So you will see that the region would not benefit with import from other developing countries. This might be the case that these countries benefit in terms of technological content of the imports. So if it is higher, as we expect, coming from the developed countries, so it would benefit from this. So basically, we have done the same thing for manufacturing, services, and agricultural, but as I say, the main result, what you see in the second table, coming from the manufacturing sector, partly from services sector, but not much from the agricultural mining sector. This is somehow like it's not that good result in terms of GCC countries. Maybe 40 or 50% of the imports, like energy, so they cannot benefit from this as we expect something like that. So these are the general findings that I already talked about. As I said, I'm going to skip this. So
1 minute, please complete. 1 minute.
1 minute, yes, I'm going to finish. So we have seen the growth of MENA region is dependent on the outside world. We don't see much integration within the region. So there's a very strong heterogeneity between the MENA and across the MENA, outside the MENA region, and across the sectors. As I said, there are 25 sectors, and you will see a bunch of different results. And considering the traditional trade versus value chain, we will see that integrating in backwardly or forwardly benefits the many countries. So what we should do in the future research, other than this, so if we could somehow predict the future flows through input and output tables that provided by Euro or other sources, we can get what would be the potential trade benefits from the general integration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for the great work you've done. And I've read the paper before you presented it more than once. And I was expecting that from the presentation I'll be able to grasp more. But contrary to the tradition, before reading my comments, I'll ask the audience if they have anything to comment, and I'm sure Bernard will have something. Chahir, if you have something. Anybody else? So let's start by Bernard and Chahir, and then I'll say my comments.
I've not read the paper, and I think I should. But I think there's two things, just big picture comments. So one is, I think, how you interpret the growth in value added as being normatively something we would want, right? Because I think the focus here is on trade, and I think a lot of where you get, if you think about it from a welfare point of view, is a lot of these intermediate inputs are going to go into domestic production for domestic consumption, right? So I think that's part of the picture. So I think in terms of the implications, you might be focusing too narrowly on the trade aspect of what you actually get from this integration. Right? So that's just a general comment. Secondly, I need to read the paper on your final conclusion, the comment in terms of start predicting future trade potential as informing trade negotiations. Because I think very little of this is going to be driven by trade agreements. Now, I don't know what you find in your section in the paper on trade agreements, so I can't really comment on that, but it seems to me that that's, I don't buy it. Let's put it that way.
Thank you very much. Chahir?
Thank you. Thank you. I just have, 4 questions, but Bernard already addressed one of them, so I'll just ask 3 things or 3 suggestions. I was wondering, in the regression table, you had both final exports and intermediate exports. I was wondering whether those exports are just final exports and they do not include also intermediate exports. Sorry?
Just finance.
Just final. Okay, because what I thought of, given that most of the variables are insignificant, perhaps there is some collinearity between those explanatory variables, and that's why they tend to be insignificant. So perhaps before introducing all of them in the same regression, just to see if you introduce, for instance, exports on their own, intermediate exports, and then intermediate imports, and perhaps an average of the 3, just to measure to have an overall measure of backward and forward integration, and to avoid at the same time the collinearity problem if we have some potential collinearity. And then a second comment also, I think that there is also a collinearity between the capital intensity and FDI, because in most of the MENA countries, FDI is mainly in the oil sector, which is capital intensive, and this can affect capital intensity, and that's why the 2 variables, I think they are insignificant, because also there is a collinearity between them. So perhaps you can alternate by introducing one of them at a time. And one final comment, perhaps instead of splitting the sample into and run the regressions by region or by sub-region, perhaps you can just pool all of them and interact the intermediate import and the intermediate export with region dummies, and this will make the samples, currently samples are not comparable because the results can be driven by the number of observations. So perhaps if you interact the trade variables with regional dummies, this can help you avoid this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Chahir. Any other comments? Last comment? But fast, please, because...
Ahmed Rashad, just a quick question. You said something about the GCC and export, that you see a surge a bit in the export. So my question is, do you differentiate between the export and re-exports?
Re-export is excluded.
Okay, then I just wanted to make sure.
Last one?
Very brief. Okay, shukran. Thank you for your paper. I think it's a great contribution. Just the thing which struck me when I came in was immediately that you said MENA region countries benefit from exporting within the region, so trading with their partners in terms of export, but not from importing. I'm just wondering how this would be then in reality, if should then the importing coming from outside MENA region, or how could this be done in practice? And a comment on your trade potential. The International Trade Center has a database on export potential, so you could have a look at this and find some more data. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me read the comments, and as you all know here, we're being technical, so excuse me if I'm not that diplomatic. I believe, and I feel that Chahir and Rashad had the same concern, but they're more diplomatic than I am. For me, the paper lacks clear objectives and makes a story out of unclear definitions and deducted relationships, making the whole objective of the paper questionable. For example, in the abstract, it is mentioned that the growth of sectors of other Middle East is enhanced with higher imported intermediates from the GCC, which does not mean anything for me. What is meant by liberalization trade nexus, which does not have a meaning and is not dealt with in the paper? Why and how are you measuring association? external trade and real GDP. Probably you mean growth of both. Literature review in page 3 does not make any relationship to the objective of the paper, which is actually, as I mentioned, not clear, and I was expecting to see it clear from here. This has not been the case. Why are you stating trade agreements, and that related to what Bernard mentions, while you are not dealing with them in any specific way? Just keep it trade. There is no mention here of trade agreements at all. Why are you using GDP deflator while you're talking about trade, which you should use an index related to trade where other indices can be a better measure? No explanation of what is meant by intermediate imports or exports, which is an issue that has been raised by the audience. The issue of how you define it is an issue which make everything vague. Page 14, strange statements which lack clear explanation, as EU and US are only countries where growth of MENA benefits by importing intermediates. That's a very strange statement. Why are you stating that growth of agriculture and mining does not seem to be associated with trade? Page 23, and I won't read it, there is a very strange thing that I didn't get. I can just highlight it to you. For me, I didn't understand one word out of it. Just to mention here, for example, you're stating if the exported intermediates to the EU increase by 9%, which is calculated by potential trade shock as explained above, and the imported intermediates from other developing countries rise by 18%, the sectoral output also rises by 13 and 26, which is obtained from input-output calculation, respectively. If GCC imports more intermediates from other developed countries, a 19% in trade flow enhance output by 29%. I kept reading it several times. I didn't grasp anything out of such statements. Finally, based on this, and I believe the main issue, the objective is not clear, we ended up by weak and vague conclusion because the analysis remained unclear. If you want to respond in 1 minute, please do, because we have to move to the other paper.
Okay.
Yasmine and Chahir, get ready.
For the first comment, there's a difference between gross and value-added term. So that's why this value-added decomposition would do this. That's the basic differences. For the second comment, you're exactly right. If there's a high correlation between the FDI stock and the gross fixed capital formation, it would do the multi-collinearity problem for the oil sector, but not the other manufacturing and services sectors. And I'll try the interaction terms. In terms of objective is not clear means, actually there are too many regression, as you see, but the main thing we try to understand that we have seen the increase in the trade share of MENA from developed countries to the developed countries. What we're trying to understand that in terms of gross trade shares, we try to understand the value-added share forward and backward. So as we have known, the forward values and backward global value change is already defined in the literature and very long in definition, but we try to extend the definition more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, this does not mean, as you all know here, we're in academic setup, so normally the technical comments are just to enhance the quality of the paper. And now we have Yasmine and Chahir and the paper entitled JVC and Innovation Evidence from MENA Firm Level Data. Yasmine, please. Have 15 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking you all for attending the session. I would also like to thank the team of the ERF for accepting our paper for presentation today. This is a co-authored work with my professor, Chahir Zaki, and we are studying the effect of global value chains participation on the innovation performance at the firm level, and we are focusing on the MENA region. The motivation for this topic came from the fact that was discussed in many plenary sessions till now, that the MENA countries are lagging behind the technological frontier of other regions. And also there was a downward trend in the global innovation index since the 2010 and 2011 and the Arab uprising in the region. This widening gap of the technology, of course, has its implication on the job creation, and it increases the mismatches between the system of the education and the labor demand, which is already a core problem in regions like the MENA. What are the mitigators? What is hampering the growth of the technology and innovation? The first reason is the low government spending on the R&D and knowledge incentive services. However, even for the few countries who have above average R&D spending, they still are not making an innovation output that matches the innovation input, which is R&D. So the main reason in the reports is the weak institutions and the lack of an institutional framework that allows innovation to be fostered. In parallel to this fact, we have another fact that the global value chains participation is an upscaling trend since the 90s. And we want to see whether the MENA region has an opportunity in terms of fostering innovation and the technology from participating in global value chains. Of course, the learning effect of international trade is not new. We know that the international interlinkages increases the knowledge, since the product cycle trade model of Krugman, emphasizing that the firms that are importing a good now will be the exporters of the good in the future due to the learning effect accompanied with international interlinkages. And the literature is broad in regard to the transmission of foreign knowledge through outsourcing activities. I'm just naming a few: Grossman and Helpman, Keller, Aghian, and our paper that we presented in the last ERF conference is now published, and we were able to capture the knowledge spillover effect of global value chains on the country level. Oh. Okay. مش مشكلة. كده. Yes, as I was saying, we were able to capture the knowledge spillover effect of global value chain participation. However, this was on the macro level. Now we're doing the same relation between GVC and innovation, but on the firm level, which can be signaled from the progress of innovation and technology for firms that are participating in global value chains. Of course, this learning effect can differ in accordance to the firm's position along this chain. The firms that are engaged in upscaling upstream activities will have a learning effect different than the firms engaged in downstream activities. We don't know the firm's position along the chain. However, we can capture the sectoral differences and the heterogeneity of the factor intensity or the skill level intensity. So this sectoral heterogeneity effect can also unveil more reasons why the innovation progress in the MENA region is sticky or not fastening. So coming from this motivation, what we do specifically is that we are tackling the effect of GVC participation on firms' innovation performance, and we are studying the sectoral heterogeneity in this regard. To do that, we are relying on a rich and comprehensive data set, which is the World Bank Enterprise Surveys, which allowed us to distinguish between different types of innovation. As Dr. Ahmed Ghoneim was mentioning yesterday, that yes, innovation is not a straightforward definition, and it can come in many forms. So we distinguish between technological and auxiliary services innovation, or in other words, innovation output and the platform to innovate. Second, and we do the estimation of the GVC on each type separately, and then we capture the sectoral heterogeneity in accordance to different factor intensity or skill level intensity. We are, of course, aware of the indigeneity problem, because as the firm becomes more innovative, this would make it easier for the firm to participate in global value chains and penetrate foreign markets. So we are tackling this by using two strategies, the propensity score matching methods and the IV approach. Our results also captured the GVC learning effect for the firms located in the MENA region. And the positive correlation or the association is happening for both types of innovation. We also captured a downward mediating effect of participating in high-tech industries. The rest of the presentation is as follows. We'll see some firm data and how we calculated or measured the variables of interest, and then we'll move to the empirical strategy, then the results, and finally the conclusion. Starting with the firm data, as I said, we have many variables for innovation and technology. We have 7 indicators, and we classified them into technological innovation or innovation output. And this happens when the firm is having a foreign licensed technology and is introducing a new product or a new service to the market, and introducing a new process, and also spends on R&D, which is the main innovation factor. And for the auxiliary services, the firm will have an innovation capability if it has a website and communicates by email. Okay, so we have 2 innovation measures, technological innovation and auxiliary services innovation. Both are binary variables equal to 1 if the covariates coexist and equal to 0 otherwise. The global value chain participation, we are relying on the literature and specifically the work of Dovis and Zaki 2020 that measures the global value chain on the firm level based on firm's characteristics. And for this, we have a simple GVC participation mode happening when the firm is simultaneously importing and exporting, and a complex GVC measure that means that the firm is not only importing and exporting, but also has foreign-owned shares and has international quality certification. So also the GVC measure is a binary variable equals to 1 if the covariates coexist and equals to 0 otherwise. And all of the variables are from the World Bank Enterprise Surveys. These are the countries that we have in the data set. We have 11 MENA countries. Of course, as expected, the share of the firms that are non-GVC participants is very high compared to the GVC participants. For the complex GVC, we have like 3 or 4 countries that almost have 0 participation. For the simple GVC, Tunisia is the highest. But as you can see, the years are not consistent. By averaging the data that we have, we can see that the firms that are not participating in GVC has almost 0 technological innovation, and this increases slowly, yes, but it's still increasing for simple GVC, reaching a higher number for complex GVC. And as you can see, the auxiliary services is higher than the technological because it needs less innovation input and it is less costly, of course. When we classify the sectors in accordance to services, labor-intensive, and capital-intensive manufacturing, you can see that the firms that are engaged in technological innovation or innovation output have 44% in capital-intensive manufacturing. But we don't see this discrepancy in auxiliary services. We rather see it in services and not in capital-intensive manufacturing. The second, 5 minutes? The second classification is the skill level intensity. I will not go into this for the sake of time. The empirical strategy, we are following a pooled OLS regression. The dependent variable is the type of innovation. We are here alternating between technological and auxiliary services innovation in firm I, country J, sector S at time T. The main independent variable GVC, we are also alternating between simple and complex. And here we are controlling for the absorptive capacity of the firm by adding the firm size and if the firm is buying physical capital. We are controlling for various unobserved heterogeneities by adding country and sector and the year dummies. Okay, to unveil the sectoral heterogeneity, we are interacting the categorical variables of sectors that we construct with the GVC measure. And the GVC indigeneity, as I said in the beginning, is tackled or circumvented by using PSM and then by using IV. And the instrument we use for the IV is whether the firm is facing barriers to trade or not. because if the firm is facing barriers to trade, then it's probably participating in GVC, but the customs and tariff barriers will not be affected by the firm's level of innovation. The empirical results show a positive and significant effect of GVC on both types of innovation, and the control variables have the expected signs. The larger the firm, the higher the effect of innovation because the absorptive capacity is higher, and the same for physical capital. We follow Hansen 2020 in classifying the sectors to services, labor-intensive and capital-intensive manufacturing, and the results show that both labor and capital-intensive manufacturing have a positive effect, but only on auxiliary services. But we don't see this significant in regard to technological innovation in the MENA countries. We also couldn't conclude a mediating effect of labor-intensive versus capital-intensive manufacturing. When we classified the sectors, again, according to skill level, we captured a positive effect of skilled labor-intensive manufacturing, and we also captured a negative mediating effect of high-tech manufacturing, which is aligning with the passionate works of Asimoglu that is sympathizing with the fact that the production of the technology in developed countries are not easily absorbed in developing countries. As you can see, the negative mediating effect is consistently negative and significant, and the skilled labor-intensive now is showing significance on the technological innovation. For the first robustness check, the propensity score matching, we here have two groups of firms. Both have the same capability to participate in GVC, and we are using simple and complex GVC measures as treatments, and the results is showing a consistent positive difference in the innovation, either technological or auxiliary services, when we use either simple or GVC modes. The second robustness check, which is the IV approach, is also showing a positive effect, which concludes a causal effect of GVC participation on both types of innovation. To conclude, we conclude a nice result that firms located in the MENA countries have a GVC learning opportunity in terms of both technological innovation and auxiliary services innovation. And therefore, enhancing GVC participation will pave the road to the global goal number 9, aiming at fostering innovation and infrastructure. And the skilled labor-intensive manufacture is really inducing both types of innovation, which shows the degree of importance of human capital investment. And it's not necessary that we invest in high-tech industries because, as we can see, there is a negative mediating effect. So low-tech and medium-low-tech would also capture the positive learning effect in the MENA countries. From a policy standpoint, we are, of course, based on the results, we call for facilitating trade by eliminating unnecessary trade costs, enhancing GVC participation in the region, investing in physical and human capital to foster the absorptive capacity of the firm, and engaging in low and medium-low technology is fine. We don't have to engage in high-tech industries so that we see the learning effect. On the contrary, it can dampen the GVC learning effect, as we have seen. These are the references we used in the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Yasmine and Chahir, for this excellent work. Let me this time reverse the order and have some comments for improvement, if possible. But let me start. This is part of your PhD thesis, right?
This is, I'm currently doing the PhD.
Because I can identify from two things. The number of references is voluminous. This is for a paper, then a lot of references are used, and the style sometimes. So if you intend to publish, you need to make sure that it is in the right way. Now, some of the things you didn't mention in the presentation, but I'll highlight here. First of all, you have been using the term moderated all the time in the paper, which I didn't get what do you mean by it. So It's very often used in the paper, and I didn't know what do you mean by it. You're using it a lot. Number two, you mentioned in the paper that there are a lot of FTAs between the US and the MENA region. Is this the case? We don't have a lot of FTAs with US. We have 4 FTAs with the US. I don't know. I cannot recall. So this is not the case at all. And then number 3, which is an issue that you need to consider, is that you have a very narrow definition of MENA. And if this is the case of data constraints, then spell it out. You're using a very narrow definition of MENA countries, not the MENA, yes. I think you'll get the comments. Number 4, the definition of auxiliary for me is modest. I mean, Chahir yesterday was presenting a paper, and he was using technology by the firm has a website. Here you identified either a website or sending an email. Yes, but I mean, does this mean anything? I mean, is this, how you consider it? Why did you remove it from the other technological things? And is it really something that we can rely on or not? Is there a well-known definition, international use definition for auxiliary, or that's your invention? And based on your invention, what are the motivations behind having it this way? Number 5, I don't know, but maybe because I'm a little bit not in reading a lot at this stage, but using the term empirical strategy for me is new. Normally we say discussion, analysis, but empirical strategy, that was a little bit new to me, to have this new term rather than analysis or. Number 6, you mentioned something called international quality certificate without providing any definition for it. What does it mean? What's its implication? And you're using it as a way out. You mentioned the size of the firms. What do you mean by this? Policy recommendations for me were confusing and not always consistent with conclusions. And that's maybe because the kind of conclusions you got were general, and hence policy recommendations were very, I mean, like the ones you presented, they did not, I mean, based on the work you did, I was expecting more concrete conclusions and policy recommendations, not general ones like, okay, go ahead and go be engaged in technology, and they are just very, very general to me. I believe that the aim of the paper is a little bit lost in addressing so many variables with blurred definitions and various effects. So you need to narrow down instead of having it that wide kind of analysis. Thank you again, and let's see if the audience have any comments. Yeah, Bernard, and then you.
Sorry, I think one comment to the ERF is they should distribute these papers before we enter into the room, because it would be good to have read the paper. You were going really, really fast. So there's a lot that I probably didn't pick up. So one thing that I don't like about all these papers that are using the World Bank Enterprise Surveys is they're saying this is about GVCs. It's not about GVCs, right? So the only thing that the firms are telling you, I export, I also import, I export and import, but that doesn't make for a GVC, right? That just means I import intermediates from China and I sell stuff to somewhere else. But that's not a value chain in the way that we think about value chains, where you have a lead firm which is organizing production, et cetera. So I just don't, I know it's become quite common. I think this is a pure trade paper. I would sell it as a trade paper, which is all about what do we get out of trade in terms of innovation, activity by firms. So that's partly a packaging issue. I agree with Ahmed. I think it would be really better to focus more clearly on what the theory suggests you should be looking for in terms of innovation activity, right? Technological upgrading. And I think, using a website, this auxiliary stuff, to me, is not at all related to the way people think about what innovation is about. So I would really rethink that bit. And I think the more interesting part of the paper is what you find on the technology dimensions, where it sometimes goes in the opposite direction of what you would like to see. And there you have a potentially an interesting story. But there again, I think the indicators we have in the World Bank Enterprise Surveys are really kind of a kitchen sink kind of rat bag, so I would be much more specific. So when you have quality certification in there, you could also say, well, that certification could be an indicator of firms actually moving up the value chain, because otherwise they would never get certified. Right? So I think just in terms of motivating what indicators you look at, I think that would be something to pay more attention to and say, okay, we're looking at these for the following reason, and the rest we just exclude. So right now I think it's a bit too much of a kitchen sink approach. I think, and then on estimation, there's a lot of literature now using synthetic difference in difference technology. So basically combining synthetic control, which you would need for the kind of an alternative to the propensity score matching, and then, you know, difference in difference. So all this stuff is now in Stata, it's off the shelf, it makes you look a lot fancier. So instead of using propensity score matching, I would say have a look at those technologies. And then I disagree with Ahmed on references. Obviously, references are really important because that's also what referees look at. And there, my advice would be downplay your own work for the time being, right? And just focus on what people think about when they think about this literature, as opposed to saying, we have Aghion, Grossman and Helpman, and me, right? So I don't, that's just advice in terms of how you package the literature review.
Thank you, Bernard. If I disagree with Bernard, then what Bernard says prevails. He's the guy.
Okay. Thank you so much, Yasmine. I think it's a very good. Somebody on the graduate school and doing that work is quite impressive. The question that I have is, there is a plethora of research on the global value chain, innovation, global value chain, and financial constraint. It's so much that is being written. And I understand this one from David Riggio. One time many years ago, I attended a conference that he was talking about the global value chain and innovation evidence from developing countries. So I'm just trying to see that is almost, your work is similar to that work, to the David Riggio. So it will be worth it to make a distinction between how you are going to be different. Is it going to be methodologically you are going to be different from David Riggio, or you are applying a case study? The case is different from because Riggio was talking about the developing countries, and you are talking about MENA region. So try to see that distinction.
Thank you so much. I need a last comment. Make it fast, please. So just to keep the time.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. My comment would be about your result of, it's okay to go to low technological and moderate. And for that comment, I think you need to package it in, I think it's true because in high-tech firms, mostly GVCs are controlled by lead firms, and the GVC is described as a captive value chain where the lead firms do not transfer the technology to their suppliers. So bring in that literature to enrich your, how this reads or looks.
Thank you, Yasmine and Chahir, for the paper. And now we move to the last paper by Ahmed. And the title of the paper is, let me read it for you, The Effect of Flexible Ownership Regulations on Foreign Investments in the UAE, an Impact Evaluation Study Using a Quasi-experimental Method. That's not a trade paper. It's more of an investment paper. Just to make sure that Bernard will tell you that's not trade, that's not a trade. And the idea was having three. Yeah, but he's focusing more on investment. Thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Ahmed Rashad, and I work for Anwar Girgash Diplomatic Academy in Abu Dhabi. And as Dr. Ahmed said, the paper is, I'm not a trade economist, and the paper is, objective of the paper is a policy evaluation using some interesting data that I was able to collect at a certain point of time. So the paper is more or less is a case study. And the story, okay, that is too small. So as we know that entrepreneurship is very important for economic growth and attracting FDIs is quite important now in the case of GCC. So regulatorily and the quality of business environment is extremely important for the private sector and for entrepreneurship skills and entrepreneurship activities. Business environment, if it's a restricted one and so on, then it could affect the private sector growth. So FDI in the GCC in general is relatively low. And as discussed, FDI in the region is relatively concentrated in oil and petroleum and so on, and chemicals, so not up to the level. So in average, the GCC countries, according to IMF, are estimated to have the potential to attract additional FDI of around 2% of GDP, which is quite huge. And openness to foreign investment and improving the business environment is also very important and could affect the allocation of resources and increasing the quantity and the quality of private investment. And the growth, according to IMF, the growth impact of FDI could be huge. The GCC basically they started with the idea of attracting investment by so free zones, basically ownership restriction. But the idea of free zones is to be a stepping stone and it's an end in itself. It's supposed to be a transitory state. But so far, little has been done to move from free zones to the mainland. So what GCC countries quite well the lesson of the diversification and the end of the oil era, and now they are doing several reforms in several fronts, and one of them recently has been UAE and generally is leading in this regards. So in 2021, after COVID, they reducing the restriction in business ownership in the mainland. So in the free zone, it has always been there. But in the mainland, they started to reduce the restriction on ownership. As you may know, the share of expatriates in the UAE is about 90% of the population, and basically their contribution to. I hope it's not my phone. Yeah, it is. So their contribution basically to investment, to savings, and so is quite low, and this is affected to some point by regulations and laws, and the UAE did, you may consider it as some sort of change in the social contract. What happened is that in the mainland, after in 2021, now expatriates and foreigners and investors can own 100% of the firms in the UAE. And before the introduction of the law, the restriction was 51% has to be controlled by a local partner, and 49% can be by an expatriate or foreigners. So the objective of the study I was to look at this, to evaluate basically this policy, and it's a sort of natural experiment and so on.
Ahmed, speed up a little bit. You have 10 minutes and you're studying the first slide.
I don't have many slides, so it's all 15. So this is just a graph show you the FDI inflows has been increasing, and then they went down, and still they don't reach up again.
هما نزلوا بعد 2008
بعد 2008. Thank you. So the FDI stock in Dubai as a percentage of Dubai GDP has not been affected that much by it, and I'm focusing in the case of Dubai as it is a business hub of the GCC. So the study objective is, of course, evaluation, policy evaluation at the heart of policy making, and to change the outcome, and whether it's a crucial policy objective. So to this point, little is known about the impact of the deregulation of ownership. Similar policy has been done in Bahrain. They did it some years ago, but I didn't see any study that has been looking at the impact of this policy. Maybe there are some improvement in the World Bank doing business before it dies out. The identification benefit from before and after change, and this is, to the best of my knowledge, is the first paper that have examining this impact. So as I said, in 2021, UAE has taken major steps to open its economy. It has allowed foreign ownership. It started giving what's a golden residency, a sort of permanent residency. It opened up its economy in several regards.
Ahmed, before that, was there foreign ownership allowed?
No,
How much?
only in the free zones. Before the introduction, only in the free zone. In the mainland, now it just opened in 2021. Before the law, it was 51, the UAE citizen, and 49 could be the expatriates. Okay, now they make it 100%, and luckily they didn't change. That doesn't come with an extra requirement in terms of capital, in terms of guarantee, in terms of the fees as well. So that can ease the identification, makes it more clean identification strategy. So now the conceptual, the idea, by now you are having an expatriate or a foreign investor, you have the full ownership, maybe less dispute, you have more control of the country, of your firm, less dispute. Sometimes you have what's so-called sleeping agent, for example, a citizen or so who doesn't really contribute to the firm, but basically collect some sort of a rent or some sort of a fixed fee. So it's basically reducing the cost of doing business. So and open up the investment opportunities and so on. So my dependent variable is number of license, and by license I mean in order to open up a business you need to go to the Dubai Department of Economic Development and get a license which will allow you to start your business activity, or you're starting a new business, or you are expanding into a new area. So it could be a company, but basically expanding into other area. So it's a proxy for business entry and expansion and dynamism. So I collected basically all the business record of Dubai. So this is, I use fully number of license that has been across 1,500 business activity. And as I said, the 100% did not require any modification or procedure. My data is a monthly data on the number of new issued license between February 21 and October 2021. So in total, I have about 14,000 data points for license across different type of economic activities. So you have, for example, one person is opening a supermarket, one person is opening an accounting firm, one person is opening a consulting company. So across, so this all the economic activities more than.
So what happens if you go from 49 to 100% equity?
So
Does that get
if it's a modification, yeah, same firm. It's not. I did not include that. I include only the new. So yeah, and what I see, what I see, if he cancel, they didn't agree together to change it, and they decided to cancel and enter as a new firm, right? Sometimes they disagree. So then I will catch him in the new business activity and so on. So it has been effective in June 2021, 1st of June, and it has been announced 1 week before. So there are no lag period between the date of announcement and date of implementation for the implementation and identification policy. So as you see, I had some data before and just right after. So I'm covering like 9 months before and after. So I have a treatment group. These are the activities that are allowed now for 100% ownership. And I have a control group that are exempted and the same rules applying to it. So it's either, so licenses that fall under the commercial law that has been changed, but licenses that under the civil transaction law has not been changed and has not been touched. So they kept to be the same. And the reason for that is a pure legal reason. It's not an economic reason, it's just legality thing. So, and the plan is basically they go from the commercial law to doing the same rules to the legal law.
5 minutes.
Okay, and the economic activities, some few exceptions, economic activities that deemed strategic are also exempted. So defense, banking, some religious economic activities. So in all, about 40% of the business activities are now can be fully controlled by expatriates. And the variation in ownership and rules across times and types of business activities could provide an instrument to identify the effect of new rules and the difference captured by the difference in the gross rates. So the method is basically a difference in difference. So you have a control group that is not affected but for a legal reason, and you have a treatment group that has been affected. So I have a classical difference in difference, as you may know. So a dummy variable for the treatment and the interaction term, which is beta 3, which catches the impact of the law, and basically there should be the two types of license should be affected by the same environment condition, the economic condition, and the type of economic activity will affect both. So basically helping me to identify out or to cancel out other time varying activities, and you are looking before and after, so you are canceling out this fixed effect. So hopefully that will be a clean identification on business entry and expansion.
So what's the dependent variable?
Is the number of new license. Yeah.
14,000.
Yeah. So the number of new license. So basically you come to us, you want to start a new firm, and you get a license for this. So you see here it's a bit obvious. So this is before here the law, and suddenly after the law, this is the total, not the treatment and control. And I see in total jump that happens directly afterwards the introduction of the law. So if I go deeper and disaggregate the number between the control and treatment group, so basically you see here this is the treatment group that has been affected, and you see here the control group. And basically, if you know, the key assumption in difference is that they both have an equal trend before the introduction of the treatment, and then what happened afterward due to treatment, they start to deviate from each other. So, and I did the equal trend assumption test and so on, and I find that they are following the same trajectory before the introduction of the law, and I see the deviation that has been starting after the law. So basically, this is, I didn't, maybe more robustness will come, but the result is quite obvious that I see deviation from the common trend just after the introduction of the law. So my main conclusion is that we find deregulation policy has led to substantial increase in the number of new businesses just right after the implementation of the new ownership law. the jump in the number of flights might be explained by several channels, the increase in investment autonomy overrunning his business, the cost of doing business by maybe reducing the agent fee or the fixed cost that maybe an expatriate need to pay out. The attractiveness of business environment could attract new businesses and new investors from abroad. So that resulted from ownership constraint. Future studies can explore the long-term impact of this policy. And future study can also look at the productivity and entrepreneurship. I wish I could have looked at the employment impact or the capital, but even I'm sure that the government of Dubai doesn't have these numbers exactly because people just tend to underestimate the size of capital. And thank you. Welcome.
So you want to read? Maybe you can start if you have comment and then I can release it. So maybe you can start if you have comment. If not, you want to start before I start? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I know you want to leave, so. Yeah, go ahead and then I'll let you leave.
Thank you, Doctor. Perhaps I mean, econometrically, I just have one comment because you mentioned, Ahmed, that you are doing a difference in difference, right? So, which means that in general, the difference in difference is based on the observables, correct? So I was wondering whether you tried any kind of an IV with an external instrument just to infer also its causal relationship or not. But other than that, I mean, the last part was, from a policy perspective, was very interesting because you clearly show that the positive effect is there. So one final suggestion, I think, but this perhaps in the paper, and I haven't read the paper, that you might want to highlight more the transmission channels that explain this positive effect, or the potential explanations behind. I mean, why shall we expect that? That's it from my side. Okay.
Renard, you want to add before I go ahead? Or anybody wants to add before I go and read the comments? Okay, you and then you.
So I think one thing that would be interesting, so I think if I understand the law, so the law now gives them access to the whole country, right? You don't need to go to the SCZ anymore. So I think one thing to look at then is there a location effect? So do you see firms that otherwise would be in the, so look at the shares by sector that you see in the SCZ, what you see outside the SCZ, and see whether that's, okay, so clearly there's an effect, but is that sectoral? So what do these guys do, right? So, and I think that would enrich the story in a bit where you're saying, okay, by making this change, you actually attract a lot more activity in XYZ, in location ABC, as opposed to otherwise in the SCZ. It would be nice to see who leaves the SCZ, but that you can't really, so that you don't have that information.
I have in the paper I mentioned which types of business that affected the most in the growth after this.
Okay, good, because presumably the SCZ gives them particular benefits as well, right? Infrastructure, taxes, whatever. So you need to control for that.
Thank you, Bernard. The last comment before I read my comments.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I think, of course, this is for the policy people. They will be very happy to see that the new law is making the companies ownership of the company are increasing. It's very interesting, and they like that ones. But the question that I have is it the law or probably the environment has changed? Because sometimes, especially Dubai thing, they are busting sometimes, and they sometimes also growing it. Is it during that period? Are you able to control any type of just not only about the regulation, but the common environment, whether the economy is growing? Well,
this is catched by the control group. So the control group, which is the other license that is not affected,
okay.
So should be exposed to the same conditions.
Okay. I'll read my comments, and I won't be that diplomatic. Yeah, Ahmed. I have a problem with this paper, a huge problem. And the reason is, the title of it at the beginning reads that you're dealing with UAE, where actually you're dealing with Dubai. So why are you you mentioned in the presentation it's the hub of the GCC. Well, actually, you're focusing only on Dubai. So that's number one. Number two, before reading the comments, You're taking your dummy, your dependent variable, which is the number of licenses. And basically, how could you, they didn't mention, how did you capture whether those are domestic guys or foreign guys? So that's number one. So that's a basic element. So maybe all what you did is not a matter of attracting foreigners. It's just domestic guys who have more money, petrodollars or what have you.
This is the control.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure because Bernard asked whether they are joint or not joint, and this is not very clear. I mean, when he asks you, are those adding just the percentage of capital or whatever. We go back to some other issues. In the paper you mentioned, how did you prove that liberalization lead to economic growth and entrepreneurship boosting this? This is not the case, it's just the increase of number of licenses. So you're generalizing that this led to economic growth and, whereas just it's the number of licensing and increased number of whatever license. I don't see the impact of anything. So you're just jumping to this leads to economic growth. So be careful with what you reach. Introduction is extremely long. It even includes graph. I've never seen ever, except if we're talking French people, and I don't think that we have here French-oriented, educated people, that they include graphs in an introduction. Mixed goals, background, and focusing on labor regulations. You didn't mention anything related to labor regulations here. And it's full of labor regulations, the introduction. The paper needs serious language revision. Statement on trade value, GDP, page 6, needs to be revisited. Page 9, although you're talking on GCC and Dubai, includes a whole paragraph on Argentina and Egypt. And this has nothing to do with the paper. Never experienced conclusion and discussion to be at the same section. Normally you have discussion and then you have a conclusion. To have the conclusion and discussion, that's new to me. Title says FDI, which is not the case, as authors examine the relaxation of restrictions on number of licenses, which can be domestic or foreign capital. Where is the economic growth and entrepreneurship boosting effect mentioned several times? Again, you're generalizing, which is not the case. Paper lacks focus, clear goal, and suffers from blurry vision and jumping to conclusions. I hope you can address those comments. If you want to answer in 2 minutes, you can. If not, and you answered randomly, then we conclude.
Maybe the presentation was clearer, ya Ahmed. He was a little bit clearer. يعني ما كانش
Go ahead.
Yeah, so...
As I mentioned, this is all for improving the papers.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I think one of the strengths of control group is that if you see some changes, that is, for example, coming from the domestic people having more money, then it should affect all the other license. I shouldn't see a deviation from trend coming in one type of activity that is affected by certain law, while the same other types of licenses would maintain its same trend without a common deviation. About economic growth and public revenue, meaning if you are on a license, open license, that you mean you are opening a new firm, it means that you are getting more public revenue for the government, it means maybe more employment opportunities. And okay, so at least I can tell you it increases the public revenue for at least every new license has to be, comes with paid to the government, and maybe that could be injected back to the government spending or budget. Okay, that can be adjusted. Regarding this Egypt and Argentina thing, I was discussing the identification. I was referring to other papers that have used similar strategy to deal with deregulation of a law. So, for example, in the case of Egypt, I was mentioning Raghi and Carolina, who did changing the law about informality and applying the same identification a bit. Similar thing to Argentina. About labor regulation, I was a bit. There is one paper I didn't mention quickly, but it's also the one paper before a law. The workers need to be permission in order to move to another sector and so on.
Maybe it's not the law. Maybe it's not what you're focusing on.
This was And this is the control group. About the labor regulation thing, that is 20 years ago. I'm looking at a very short time period, 4 months is before, 4 months is after, so the time interval itself is not that big to drive that change. Anyway, so.
Thank you. Thank you all. Enjoy your lunch and all the rest.